Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of White House Chronicle, which is coming right up. But first, a bit of an introduction. You all know that game that people play. Who would you like to have dinner with? And they say, oh, well, I'd like to have dinner with Winston Churchill or Napoleon, or, you know, just pick a name. Or if it's a living person, the president, his wife, whatever. Well, I watched a man give a speech many years ago at Columbia University at one of their sessions, I suppose, a hall up the river called Arden House, up the Hudson River. And the speaker was Professor Amitai Etzioni, at that time of Columbia University. And it was the height of the energy crisis. And it was a marvelous discussion about how we could live within the available resources we had, not just the resources of energy, but all resources, in, I believe, a subject called communitarianism. Well, I'm lucky because this man I wanted to meet, and then I read his articles in the Wall Street Journal, ends up in Washington as a professor at the George Washington University, and I have gotten to know Amitai Etzioni. Not only have I gotten to know him, I'm in the very fortunate position of being able to introduce you to him. I will be back with the extraordinary Amitai Etzioni in a few moments.
Many have spoken out on the need to transition to a clean energy future. At Exelon, we are acting. By 2020, we are committed to reducing, offsetting, or displacing more than 15 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions annually through greening our operations, helping our customers and communities reduce their emissions, and offering more low-carbon electricity in the marketplace. At Exelon, we are taking action and we are seeing results.
White House Chronicle is produced in collaboration with WHUT, Howard University Television. And now, the program host, nationally syndicated columnist Llewellyn King, and co-host Linda Gasparello.
Hello again, and thank you so much for coming along. I promised you the exceptional Amitai Etzioni, and here he is. Welcome to the broadcast, sir. Tell me about communitarianism. This is your own little philosophy, if you will, global following, I understand. Tell me what is meant by communitarianism. I know it's global because I have a friend in England who is quite passionate about it and didn't really believe that I'd met you, didn't think that somebody like me would know somebody like you.
Well, thank you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity. First of all, to see you again, and second, to share ideas with people who follow you, both on television and on radio, and in print. And so the basic idea of communitarianism comes from the word community, which is really what it's about. And the notion is that we're not just individuals who have rights and liberties which are sacred, but we are also members of one another. We are members of families, our immediate and extended families. We have a network of friends, we have neighbors, and even larger communities like nations or religious groups, ethnic groups, a Jewish community, gay community. There are a large variety of communities. And today, we're particularly concerned about the international community, which really brings us to what I consider today's subject, the concerns that ultimately we'll have a global community.
China is on your mind, or more especially, American attitudes to China,
Exactly.
which are very confused. We
Exactly.
buy an enormous number of goods. I can hardly clothe myself without some Chinese garment, if not the entire ensemble. And we borrow all our money from China. And yet, it seems to be the incipient enemy. There's a building up of one day there'll be a confrontation. One day these two, East and West, will meet in the personages of the United States and of China.
Well, I hope some people who will listen to us will join us in saying, let's pause a moment, or as the young people say, let's cool it. We are, to be fair...
I say cool it. Does that make me young?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Guaranteed in writing. All nations, to be fair, have a tendency to divide us against them. It's so easy to blame the outsider for whatever problems we have rather than admitting our own difficulties and failures. It's a priori, from the get-go, very tempting to make adversaries, if not enemies. And then the industries will benefit from it. So it's very quickly to get on that escalator. And we have been there, declaring nations as a threat. Japan for a while was greatly feared. And I mean, not during World War II, but in recent years when they were economic success, very similar to the economic success of China today. So I think what we need to do is go back and re-examine the question, how are we going to deal with China, which is clearly growing. So first of all, we should remember that the economic growth of China is vastly exaggerated, because what people tend to look at, first of all, is this enormous growth rate they used to have, which is rapidly slowing down. But more important, China has 4 times more people to feed and house than we do. So even as the economy growing, their income per capita...
War to fight. Isn't that part of the fear?
Yes, but the question is, why would the people of China want to go to war with anybody? They show every indication that what they want is affluence. They're after what we are after. They want to have a good life. If you go, and you know you've been to Shanghai or Beijing or any of these places, in effect they're more gaga about consumer goods than we are. And good half the population doesn't have much of anything. I mean, they don't have running water, many of them. They have outhouses. So in effect, the whole Chinese regime is no longer
I agree
based
with you in large measure here, but I have to question that China is only interested in prosperity. There is the territorial claims in the South China Sea, which goes all around there. You know, somebody once said the problem with Asia is the naming of oceans, straits, seas after countries. You've got anyway, the South China Sea is claimed as a territory of China, which is preposterous, and they're causing problems for the Philippines, problems for Vietnam. Any hint that there's oil offshore, China claims that bit of the ocean. And then there are a few uninhabitable islands that people claim. And the law of the sea is a bit unclear on that. Why is China so belligerent towards its immediate neighbors on those issues?
Well, I think that's a fair challenge. And the way China conducts itself in Vietnam, dealing with Philippines, or with the South China Sea, are fair test cases. But it shows to me something different. What we've seen so far, China is very anxious to secure flow of raw material and oil because they have very little of it and they have an enormous economy which all the time needs to suck in these resources which they pay for. And they hope that under the South China Sea there's a lot of that and they would like to harvest it. So what they did now is what any American lawyer will do in a court. They stake the claim. They say, we claim it's ours, but they have not, with very few exceptions, reinforced that with gunships. That's, by the way, what the Canadians and the Russians are doing when they lay claims on the North Pole. They are sending troops. China is basically going into a negotiation process, which is exactly what you want a peaceful nation to do. It had some very minor skirmishes with the Philippines. And again, you could spend the whole show just arguing who exactly started that, who was exactly at fault. But it's a minor event in the scale of things. So the bigger question is, and that's the question Henry Kissinger raised, this Zbigniew Brzezinski raised, and that is we United States, have to decide what is our basic position to China. And in the end, two options. One, we can try for a while to engage China, to treat China respectfully as a growing power, which we're going to deal with. We have many shared interests to deal with terrorism, with the spread of nuclear weapon, with the irresponsibility of North Korea, and so on. We have, of course, economic interests. And so on the one alternative is to engage China, to treat them as a potential partner. The other is to go now on a path of positioning military forces around China, which we are doing, selling ever more arms to Taiwan, sending our trawlers and airplanes, as we do daily, to spy on them. And so I'm not saying, and let me return to you in a moment, that in the longer run, we may not have to face up to them. But there is enough time for a hedge for peace.
There are things that China is doing that seem not as benign as you suggest. They've made a grab for global resources that has never been seen in all of history. Not the British Empire or the scramble for Africa was anything like this scene. They've sent across the globe people to buy up, to pervert local countries by building a sports stadium in the Caribbean or all sorts of facilities in Africa, and essentially bought off the bad governments of Africa by saying, we will not criticize you, we don't see anything, we just want your copper, your oil. And then, of course, the Africans wake up and find out that not only are they getting no value added, they're not even getting the work of extracting these minerals because labor from China is arriving to extract these minerals. None of this is discussed, none of this is on the table, none of this is very public, it's a closed society, and one could be excused for having some alarm about where it is going in the future. It has not been able to give us a coherent picture of its own ambitions.
You raised four excellent issues. But my short answer would be, so you claim they behave like Exxon Oil, like our companies. But it is...
no, I'm not saying that the scrambles historically have been pure in any sense from the Romans forward.
I know you don't. But I think there are four serious issues. First of all, when we say grab, so far they purchase things. They pay. We can argue if there was a fair pay, but they didn't send troops to grab these things or gunships as we used to do, as France, Britain, the Dutch, and everybody else. Second, to a very large extent, surprisingly large extent, these moves are self-correcting. They did initially send largely their labor force rather than use local labor force. They paid poorly. They caused environmental damage. And the Africans and the Latin Americans very quickly learned the lessons, and they're pushing them back. They're insisting on better terms and such. It's a very normal, if you wish.
Let's hold these thoughts while we do a little identification here for the benefit of primarily of our listeners on Sirius XM Radio, channel 124, the POTUS channel, where I'm glad to say the audio from this program is broadcast every Saturday at 9:30 a.m., 3:30 p.m. and again at 9:30 p.m. That is Eastern Time. You also can see this program worldwide on the English language stations of the Voice of America and on 200 American television stations, public television, and the so-called PEG stations, which is public, educational, and government channels, including, and I'm but happy about this, Midland, Michigan, because the newspaper there publishes my column, so I feel quite attached to Midland, although I've never been there. Back to the discussion.